The story begins with the protagonist of the story, the Baskerville family's hound, Victor Van Baskerville's head on a guillotine. He was a loyal hound for the family, but he had been sentenced to the guillotine for false charges of associating with the Demon Clan. As he faced his death, he made a vow that if he were to live again, he would not live as a hound again. Afterwards, Victor woke up in a cradle, disoriented and confused. He thought he might be in hell, as his surroundings were loud and his body felt heavy. It looked like Victor was currently at a nursery, as there were many children there, all of them crying. Meanwhile, the Baskerville family patriarch, Hugo Le Baskerville, was inspecting the children's cradle. He roamed around the room and noticed children crying, and he dismissed them as insignificant, and even referred to them as trash. However, when he approached Victor, he noticed that the child was quieter than the others. Hugo ordered for Victor to be moved to the Cradle of Swords, and his attendant obeyed without question. As Victor lay in the cradle, he looked up at Hugo with pure hatred in his eyes. He knew that Hugo was the main culprit behind his false charges and subsequent execution. Victor realized that he had been regressed to when he was a baby, and that he had lived his past life as a hound for the Baskerville family. Victor had been born into an illegitimate family and had received training in a poor environment. He had been raised to be a loyal hound, willing to do any dirty work that was required of him in order to make the Baskerville family the best of the 7 families. Victor had stayed loyal to the family and to Hugo because he had wanted to be acknowledged, but his loyalty had ultimately been repaid with a death sentence. The reason behind his execution was simple. He knew too much. Victor swore that he would never live that life again and that he would take his revenge. However, with his newborn body, he knew that he couldn't do anything. Being moved to the Cradle of Swords was a good opportunity for Victor to become stronger. Children born into the Baskerville family had to go through one trial called the Cradle of Swords. They were thrown into a maze of swords, and after going through that, they had to get to the Styx River to be examined for their talent. The Styx River was a legendary river that turned the bodies of children into iron. However, there was a limit to how many children it could affect, so being able to reach it faster was crucial. The only way to reach the Styx River first was to head straight out of the helix-shaped wall of blades, which was no easy feat. As Victor crawled through the Cradle of Swords maze, he couldn't help but think about his past life. He had been ousted by his siblings and couldn't receive the effect he so desperately needed. But this time, things would be different. He was determined to monopolize the Styx River's blessing for as long as he could. As he made his way through the maze, he suddenly fell into the Styx River. The water seeped deep into his body and bones through his cuts, causing him intense pain. But he knew that he had to endure it for as long as he could. He couldn't let this opportunity slip away from him. Outside the maze, Victor's attendants were shouting for him to come out. They were worried that he would die if he stayed underwater any longer. But Victor was determined to hold on for as long as possible. Meanwhile, Hugo watched with expectation in his eyes. He asked the Baskerville family head butler John Barrymore how much time had passed since Victor had gotten in the river. Barrymore responded that around 7 minutes had passed. Hugo laughed and said that Victor might die. The attendants looked at him with worry, requesting the patriarch Hugo to save Victor. Hugo called out to Victor, telling him that he could come out of the water now. But Victor was too busy absorbing the Styx River water to pay attention. He thought to himself that he couldn't give up this opportunity so easily. He needed to absorb as much as he could until the very end. But then he started to fall down as water entered his mouth. Despite the danger he was in, Victor knew that he needed to endure it. He kept repeating to himself to endure, endure, endure. It looked like Victor was about to drown, but Hugo pulled him out of the water with a smug smile on his face. He commented on how greedy Victor was, even drinking the water from the Styx River. He then noticed that Victor already had teeth, which surprised him. Hugo asked the head butler for Victor's name, and he learned that it was Victor Van Baskerville. Hugo smirked and said that a very greedy son had been born. Victor, who was still somewhat conscious, thought to himself that he needed to use this time to sharpen his canines in secret. He was determined to rip his master's head off when the time came, and he would do it with his own hands. The Baskerville family would disappear into history too by his own hands. Victor Van Baskerville was born as the bastard son of Hugo Le Baskerville, a renowned nobleman of his time. At the tender age of 8, it was apparent that Victor possessed an extraordinary intelligence that far surpassed his peers. However, within the Baskerville family, he was considered nothing but ordinary, as he did not possess the direct lineage of the family's prominent bloodline. As Victor grew older, he began to explore different fields of interest, eventually settling on the treacherous paths of assassination, espionage, and conquest. By the time he had reached the age of 20, he had already embarked on several missions that showcased his impressive skill set. But despite his achievements, Victor still felt inadequate in comparison to those of direct lineage. At the age of 30, the gate leading to the demonic realm had opened, signaling the beginning of a terrifying invasion by the demon clans. Victor, now a seasoned warrior, stepped up to defend his realm, engaging in battles that saw him slaughter monsters left and right. For the next 5 years, Vicar endured through the era of destruction, fighting tirelessly to protect his people. And when the long war finally came to an end, it was the humans who emerged victorious. For his unwavering loyalty and bravery, Vicar was rewarded by the kingdom. However, the reward he received was not what he expected. Instead of being praised and celebrated for his efforts, he was met with defamatory accusations and false allegations. These unfounded claims led to Vicar's eventual execution by the guillotine's blade. Vicar sat up on his bed, realizing that he was in a nursery. He looked around and came to the realization that he had successfully absorbed the Styx River. This was a major achievement, and he knew that he now had a better starting point in life than before. Suddenly, he heard the door open and a maid entered the room. The maid seemed surprised and murmured to herself, saying why Madame had asked to place this sort of thing on the bed of the young Master Vicar. Vicar was surprised to hear the maid refer to Madame, as he never expected anyone in the Baskerville family to give him, a bastard, a present. The maid left after placing a box in Vicar's bed. As Vicar saw the box opening, he was shocked to see 2 bloody mambas coming out of it. He wondered if Madame had sent them to assassinate him. Vicar knew that there were only a few people in the Baskerville family who would be referred to as Madame, and whoever it was, she was probably trying to reduce competition. As the mambas hissed at Vicar, he realized that they could kill all of the babies in the nursery. However, Vicar caught both the mambas with his bare hands. Filled with hatred, he thought that he would bring the entire Baskerville family down with his own 2 hands. The next day, the people of Baskerville were shocked to find the child sleeping peacefully next to the dead vipers. All the nannies who had been on shift that night were executed after torture, but the reason for the vipers' appearance remained unknown. Only the young Hound Vicar knew the truth. 8 years later, Vicar was back in class, listening to his teacher discuss the levels of swordsmanship. The teacher explained that if one cannot yet imbue their sword with mana, they are considered a sword beginner. The next level is the sword expert, where one can infuse the blade with a little bit of mana. When the blade emits mana in liquid-like aura form, it is called sword graduator. Lastly, the level at which the aura is solid and the form can freely be changed is called sword master, which is the highest level of swordsmanship. Upon hearing that Sir Hugo, the strongest of the Baskervilles, was a sword master, all the students present exclaimed in surprise and astonishment. However, Vicar was lost in thought and felt the need to regain the power he had prior to his regression before the coming-of-age ceremony. The teacher noticed Vicar's distracted state and thought highly of him, knowing that he had earned a strong physique by diving in the Styx River for 7 minutes. The teacher believed that Vicar was much more talented than the other students and that the patriarch would be very happy to know about his progress. As Vicar was lost in thought about how many years he needed to kill Hugo, he didn't notice the triplets giving him an evil look. After class was over, they pushed him and started mocking him, calling him a garbage van, and talked about the rumors about him diving in the Styx River and strangling 2 vipers to death when he was just a baby. Vicar recognized the triplets as the ones who had stabbed him in the past when he was running away after the defamation. They were known as Hugo le Baskerville's Trident, and their names were Highborough le Baskerville, Middleborough le Baskerville, and Lowborough le Baskerville, all 9 years old. The triplets continued to taunt Vicar, telling him to stop lying and that they didn't like him. Vicar thought to himself that they were going to be a real pain in the ass in just 10 years and that it might be a good idea to put them in their place now. As Vicar stood before the triplets, one of them brandished a knife and taunted him with a rumor he had heard, that if you stayed in the Styx River for long enough, your body would become like steel, and you would be impervious to injury from blades. The other 2 triplets eagerly echoed their agreement, while the third gave the order for one of the others to hold Vicar still. The triplet caught Vicar from behind and covered his mouth with one hand and said, "I'll eat my hand if he can endure this for 3 minutes." Vicar was not afraid, and even played along with this cruel game for a moment. The triplets attempted to harm him with the knife. 1 minute passed, 3 minutes passed, 10 minutes passed, but Vicar remained unscathed, and the triplets began to realize that the legend they had heard was true. They grew bored with their game and began to release Vicar. As the triplet holding Vicar released him, he noticed blood on his hand and realized that his finger was missing. Vicar then spat out the triplet's finger from his mouth. The triplet was shocked and asked Vicar what he was doing. With an evil smile on his face, Vicar reminded the triplet of his promise to eat his own hand. Meanwhile, the other 2 triplets were trying to calm down the situation and suggested that they go to a priest to put the finger back. But Vicar was not interested in that and instead asked to let them go. The triplet then attacked Vicar with a knife, calling him a bastard and reminding him that they were a year older than him. Vicar did not dodge the attack and allowed the knife to stick into him, but to the triplet's surprise, it could not pierce his skin. Vicar twisted the triplet's hand and reminded them that they had forgotten that they were dealing with a Baskerville, where power and talent overcome age. With an evil look on his face, Vicar suggested that they continue playing until the end. Vicar twisted the triplet's hands mercilessly, causing him to cry out in pain. He declared in a low, menacing voice that they were in Baskerville, where age doesn't matter as long as you have strength and talent. The triplets, terrified, looked at each other in shock. Vicar suddenly punched the triplets, knocking him to the ground, while the other two watched in disbelief. The third triplet attacked Vicar in a fit of anger, but he quickly kicked him in the face, sending him crashing down. The room fell silent as the triplets lay there, battered and broken. Vicar stood over them, looking cold and unfeeling. He then told the triplets that they would get better with treatment. But he also made it clear that he wouldn't let them leave the room and they would have to live with the discomfort of their own bodies. However, he would be generous and allow one of them to leave. The triplets were surprised and relieved to hear this, and asked which one could leave. Vicar picked up a knife and threw it in front of the triplets, telling them that they would have to decide for themselves who would leave the room. He then started to leave, but not before turning back and issuing a taunting remark saying that he can't wait long, so decide quickly. At least one of you should live right. The triplets looked at the knife and then at each other, realizing that survival was their only option. They began to fight, each trying to grab the knife and gain the upper hand. The sounds of their struggle echoed through the room, and Vicar listened with satisfaction from outside. He had successfully caused the Triton of Baskerville to split, pitting brother against brother in a fight for survival. In the Patriarch's office, the head butler, John Barrymore, delivered some unsettling news to the Baskerville clan patriarch, Hugo Le Baskerville. The Moore clan had been causing trouble in the Ruby Mines, claiming it as their territory. However, Patriarch Hugo assured John that they would handle the matter when the Moore clan reached out to them. John then reported on the interim evaluation of the juvenile fortress and informed the Patriarch that Master Vicar had scored the highest on the written exam. The practical exam was scheduled in 5 days, and the Guardian Knights had vacated the premises in preparation. However, John hesitated before informing the Patriarch of a recent incident at the juvenile fortress. John informed the Patriarch that there had been a big fight amongst the young masters at the fortress. Patriarch Hugo was concerned and asked how many of them had died. Butler John informed Hugo that there were no casualties, but Master Highborough's teeth had been completely damaged. Master Midleborough's jaw had been smashed in, and Master Lowborough's left index finger had been amputated. While they had recovered their health since being treated, the psychological damage done to them seemed significant. Patriarch Hugo was taken aback and remarked that they wouldn't have fought amongst themselves since they were so close. John then revealed that there was some friction with another young master, an 8-year-old named Master Vicar, who had wounded the 3 young masters and who also had the highest scores on the written exam. After Patriarch Hugo expressed his concern about the incident at the juvenile fortress, he summoned Vicar to his office. Vicar arrived with a smile on his face and Patriarch Hugo commented on how much he had grown since they last met. Patriarch Hugo then brought up the issue of Vicar disabling the 9-year-old triplets in his senior class. Vicar responded that the brothers had received proper medical treatment since then. However, Patriarch Hugo pointed out that he was not talking about physical disabilities, but the disability of the heart. He explained how the incident had torn the brothers' relationship apart, and asked Vicar if he thought what he did was wrong. To this, Vicar responded with a question of his own, asking what did he do wrong. Patriarch Hugo pointed out that he had turned his brothers into a total mess. Vicar, with a confident look in his crimson eyes, replied that he was stronger, and how could the stronger person be wrong? Patriarch Hugo then revealed Vicar's brothers had forgiven him, yet he still didn't feel an ounce of guilt. Vicar seemed surprised by this news and asked, "They forgave me." Vicar suddenly recalled a memory before his regression. The youngest daughter of a family that was ruined by the Baskerville clan came to pay Hugo a visit. She had become a nun after many years, and she forgave Hugo despite his clan being responsible for the ruin of her family. Vicar repeated the same line that Hugo had said to the nun, that forgiveness is an excuse made by the weak who cannot seek revenge due to their lack of strength. As Vicar talked about the importance of strength, Hugo showed his approval by nodding and his eyes glowing with agreement. He then turned to the head butler, Barrymore, and instructed him to allow Vicar to take any snack he wanted from the food storage, enough for him to carry on his own. Vicar expressed his gratitude by requesting chocolates. As Vicar was leaving with head butler, Hugo addressed him as his son, urging him to perform well on the upcoming evaluation and not to lose to the direct descendants. Vicar acknowledged the advice, but his face was filled with hatred. Vicar and head butler made their way to the storage room. The head butler began to inform him about the chocolate. He explained that it was the highest quality chocolate that the Moore clan had obtained with much difficulty, and that it was enjoyed by their gourmands. However, Vicar quickly interrupted him and stated that he didn't want anything that was processed. The head butler was taken aback by this and asked for clarification. Vicar then requested cacao beans, ones that had a rich aroma. The head butler was confused but complied and had the beans brought to Vicar. As Vicar put one of the beans in his mouth, the chef informed him that they were the bloody beans known for their rich aroma and that with just one bean, He could produce 100 liters of chocolate. The head butler watched as Vicar ate the bitter bean, and thought to himself that Vicar must really love chocolate to eat something so bitter on its own. And this was a good method to obtain more chocolate, as after being processed he would have a huge amount of chocolate available. The chef asked Vicar if he wanted them to process the beans and send them to his room, but Vicar declined and said he would take them as is. The head butler was left wondering if Vicar just had peculiar tastes. Vicar had no interest in eating the chocolate, but he had a plan for the cacao beans. Vicar planned to use the beans in the upcoming practical exam in 5 days. Little did they know, a catastrophic event would soon occur, unlike anything that had ever happened before in the Baskerville clan's history. In this world, the Baskerville family is known as the Berserker family due to the intense training and evaluation that their children undergo from a young age. The training begins when the children are able to take their first steps, and they are immediately put through a rigorous test of their stamina. They must run up a steep mountain and are not allowed to lie down or rest on their stomachs except for allocated times. As if this wasn't enough, when it's time for them to sleep, they are required to sleep alongside a monster corpse. This is to help them adjust to tough environments and become resilient in the face of danger. These extreme practices are what make the Baskerville family feared and respected throughout the land. After this period of grueling training, the children reach the age of 8, and the real test begins. The young hounds, as they are called, must undergo a deadly evaluation. This is the defining moment that has earned the Baskerville family its notorious reputation. Now, on the outskirts of the territory, there is a mountain known as the La Rougette La Noire Mountain. It is filled with monsters, and it is here that the young hounds gather to undergo their evaluation. The instructor of the Baskerville family, Shadow Dog Pavlov van Baskerville, stood before the young masters and explained the rules of the test. They needed to survive for a month in the area and hunt large and strong monsters. He went on to explain that the points for being successful in surviving were 10 points, and if the young masters survived without becoming disabled, it was 30 points. If they failed other young masters and survived, it was 50 points. If they defeated a monster and survived, it was 70 points. And if they fulfilled all the above conditions, they would receive 90 points. Pavlov also told the young masters that if they stole the badge that was given to them from someone else, additional points would be given. However, if they died, they would receive 0 points. He emphasized that there were no 100 points and reminded them of Sir Hugo's lesson that a swordsman dies the moment they become arrogant. The instructor also cautioned against leaving the designated area, as La Rougette La Noire Mountain was a restricted area with many undiscovered things. He recommended that the young masters move within the given space where the monsters had already been subjugated. He informed them that during the exam, shadow dogs would be hiding and grading them. As the young masters waited for the start of the practical exam, some of them noticed Vicar and began discussing his past feats. Despite their comments, Vicar remained composed and thought about the La Rougette La Noire Mountain, which he had visited before. Meanwhile, the triplets standing near Vicar were visibly nervous, sweating with fear. Shadow Dog Pavlov addressed the young masters, wishing them good luck before the bell rang, signaling the start of the exam. As soon as the bell rang, all the young masters started running towards different parts of the mountain to occupy advantageous areas. One of the young masters had a plan and thought about going to a place he had seen in the last year's exam, hoping to gain an edge. The young master behind him thought he could not survive alone and decided to follow him, with the intention of taking it from him. Meanwhile, the triplets were arguing amongst themselves, each wanting to do things their own way and come out on top. Shadow Dog Pavlov observed as the exam began, knowing that it was important to keep casualties to a minimum. Although killing was not prohibited, it was discouraged, and any contestant who did kill would have points deducted. Pavlov and the other shadow dogs were determined to do their best to prevent any unnecessary deaths. One of the shadow dogs that was assigned to follow Vicar was surprised to see him heading towards a restricted area. He wondered where Vicar was going and if he was the rumored genius who had distinguished himself since childhood. The shadow dog was intrigued and looked forward to seeing the skills Vicar would display. Vicar approached a large tree and wondered if this was the right spot. He thought that the soft ground would be suitable for him to set up camp for a while. Vicar then considered taking a break, which left the shadow dog following him confused. While other participants were busy fighting each other for points or facing monsters, Vicar gathered wood and practiced with a wooden stick. Later on, he slept peacefully under the tree. The shadow dog who had been watching Vicar grew impatient and started to question his actions. He wondered how long it had been since Vicar had taken a break and observed that he spent most of his time digging holes, hunting for food, or collecting equipment. The shadow dog started to doubt the rumors about Vicar's supposed genius, wondering if he was planning on hiding instead of actively participating in the exam. At last, the shadow dog decided to leave and find something interesting elsewhere. As soon as the shadow dog left, Vicar's face lit up with a smile. He was happy that he could finally relax and thought to himself that camping outside reminded him of the old days. Victor recalled a conversation with his group mate about using cacao beans to make fish smell less fishy. He threw some bloody beans into the fire and remarked that the interfering shadow dog was finally gone and he had finished all his preparations. He wondered if he should start his hunt now. A few days later, Victor entered the restricted area and recognized it from his scouting days. As he was roaming around, he noticed a burning smell and burnt tree roots. He knew that the habitat of the monster he was looking for was around there. Suddenly, he spotted burning stool and realized that he had found it. There was only one monster around there that produced that kind of dropping, a hellhound. The hellhound stood in front of Victor with flame erupting from its mouth. The hellhound was a dog from hell that brought horrific disasters to those who encountered it. It had a risk rating of B+ and was 3 meters in size. Its sulfuric flames that came out of its mouth and eyes were extremely gaseous and could trigger sparks. If it bit someone, they could not survive. The living things used as firewood would burn and not go out until they completely disappeared. Victor knew that he was in trouble when he saw the towering figure of the lookout monster that swallowed the hellfires of the oil world. The hellhound. The beast was known to be one of the most dangerous monsters in the land, and Victor had barely survived his encounter with one when he was just 18 years old in his past life. Now, as an 8-year-old, Victor knew that it would be impossible for him to defeat the hellhound alone. But he remembered a way to take on the beast that even a child could manage. As the hellhound lunged towards him, Victor quickly dodged to the side, remembering the first weakness of hellhounds. They could only move in straight lines. They found it difficult to suddenly change directions. Victor quickly dropped some water on the ground, and as the hellhound charged towards him, he shouted out the second weakness of lookout monsters. They were unable to cross water. Because of the water Victor dropped, the hellhound took a longer route to reach Victor, giving him more time to dodge. Victor knew that even a shallow depth of water could slow them down significantly, exposing the weakness common to all canine monsters, opening their mouth while running. Victor found himself in another life-threatening situation as the bloodthirsty hellhound attacked him. But Victor was prepared, and he threw a bloody bean into the monster's mouth. After landing, the hellhound suddenly started to whimper in pain and become unable to move. Victor explained that chocolate was poison to canines, and with the bloody bean's power to make 100 liters of chocolate with just one bean, it was obvious what it would do to a canine monster like the hellhound. He drew his sword and aimed for the hellhound's weak spot where the ribs were not present, the kidney. With a swift and decisive strike, Victor pierced the hellhound's kidney, killing it easily. As he absorbed the energy called XP or karma from the defeated monster, Victor felt his body getting stronger. He swung his sword and felt it becoming lighter, knowing that he was catching up to where he was before his regression before he even reached the age of 15. Victor couldn't help but wonder what kind of expression Hugo would make when he brought back a monster with a risk rating of B+ as an 8-year-old child. Victor stood there, ready to take the head of the hellhound he had just defeated, feeling confident in his abilities. He knew he had already secured first place in the practical test, and was eager to claim his reward, something he never would have dreamed of in his past life. But his moment of triumph was short-lived as a group of hellhounds approached him, likely seeking revenge for their fallen comrade. Victor remained calm and collected, already knowing the weaknesses of these creatures and how to defeat them. As the hellhounds drew nearer, Victor took out his sword and prepared to take them on. He had plenty of bloody beans left and was ready to use them to his advantage. With a smirk on his face, he cut the dead hellhound's head and taunted the hellhounds, knowing they were no match for his skills and knowledge. He had already defeated one of their kind and was prepared to take them all down. The hellhounds suddenly started whimpering, which immediately caught Victor's attention. He couldn't believe that the fierce beasts were feeling scared of a mere 8-year-old's bloodthirst. Hellhounds would never submit to their prey even if they were to die, Victor thought to himself, trying to figure out what could have caused the hellhounds to feel so uneasy. As Victor turned around, he saw a monstrous creature with 3 heads standing before him. It was a Cerberus, the legendary 3-headed dog from Greek mythology. The creature was massive, measuring at least 7 meters in size, and Victor knew that a Cerberus had a risk rating of A+. Victor was bewildered as to what a Cerberus, which typically inhabited the 7th ridge of the La Rouge et La Noire mountain, was doing here. The Cerberus was known as the ultimate lookout monster, residing in a place where all the dead spirits were headed. Victor noticed that the Cerberus was bleeding and had multiple arrows stuck in its body. He realized that someone might have been hunting it, and it had come all the way to this place being chased. This was his chance to kill an injured A+ rank monster, and he decided to attack the Cerberus. Despite the Cerberus being a powerful and dangerous creature, Victor had been hiding his true abilities as a sword expert and had already reached a high level of expertise. His body had been strengthened by the river Styx, and all the weapons he possessed were working well against the injured Cerberus. With his refined swordsmanship, which he had developed through wars with the demon clans, He successfully landed some hits on the Cerberus. Vicar thought that he could do it, as an injured Cerberus was doable. Vicar's attack on the Cerberus seemed to be working, and he thought he had a chance of defeating the injured A+ rank monster. However, in a moment of carelessness, Vicar let his guard down, allowing the Cerberus to strike back with its claws. The first attack broke Vicar's sword, and the second sent him flying through the air. The force of the Cerberus's attack sent Vicar hurtling towards a tree trunk. With a sickening thud, he smashed into the tree trunk, and blood poured from his mouth. The impact had clearly caused a serious injury, and Vicar lay still, his body broken and unmoving. Vicar's eyes opened slowly and a surge of panic rushed through him as he remembered the direct attack of the Cerberus and felt a sharp pain in his left arm. He wondered if the beast had ripped his arm off in the attack, but when he looked down, he saw that it was still attached to his body, with some injuries. Vicar was relieved that the Cerberus was wounded and had not managed to sever his arm completely. He thought about the river Styx and how its magical properties might have played a role in protecting him from the beast's full force. He felt grateful for its protection but knew he couldn't rely on it completely. His relief was short-lived, however, as he quickly realized that the damage was still significant. He knew he wouldn't be able to take another hit from the Cerberus, and so he dodged as the beast attacked him once again. As an experienced hunter, he knew that he had to find the best way out of situations like this. The best possible decision right now was to run, with his tail tucked between his legs. As he ran, Vicar's mind raced with thoughts of survival. He knew that he had to find a way out of this situation, and fast. His eyes darted around, looking for an escape route. That's when he saw it, an iron fence just a few yards away. Vicar's heart leaped with hope. He knew that if he could get past that fence, he would be out of the restricted area and closer to safety. He pushed himself harder, running with all his might. With a burst of adrenaline, Vicar pushed himself through the gate, his heart pounding with relief. He had made it out of the restricted area, but he knew that he was not out of danger yet. He had to reach that place, the safe haven he had prepared for himself before embarking on this dangerous mission. As he ran, he searched for something in the woods nearby, his heart racing with the fear of being caught by the hellhound. Finally, he spotted what he was looking for, a pit he had prepared beforehand. He jumped forward, narrowly avoiding Cerberus's jaws, and the hellhound fell into the pit full of wooden spears. Vicar couldn't help but smile to himself, knowing that he had prepared well for this battle. He had smeared the wooden spears with the bloody bean essence that acted as poison for the cannon monsters. Cerberus growled and foam started oozing from its mouth, but Vicar remained focused and prepared for the next phase of the battle. He knew that Cerberus was a high-ranking demon and that this fight would be one of the toughest of his life. Vicar prepared a wooden spear and he threw it at Cerberus, hitting the hellhound's side. But the Cerberus was still alive and walking towards him, ready to attack. Vicar counted the hellhound's steps as it approached him, one by one. As soon as Cerberus took the 7th step, it stopped abruptly, falling to the ground right in front of Vicar. Vicar let out a sigh of relief, realizing that the rumors were true. The wooden spear he had just thrown was not like the others. It was a spear laced with the venomous fang of the deadly bloody mamba snake that prevented its victim from walking more than 7 steps once they were bitten. Vicar had hidden it away when he was younger, knowing that it could come in handy one day. The energy emanating from Cerberus' body entered Vicar as he stood over the 3 lifeless heads of the beast. He marveled at the power he now possessed, but his mind quickly turned to the concern of how he was going to transport the massive body back. He knew that the cause of the Cerberus's death would be obvious to anyone who saw it, and he began to consider who might be his witness. Perhaps the guardian knight who had seen him carving the wooden spears could be of help. But then, Vicar's thoughts turned to something else entirely. The Cerberus was a gatekeeper, which meant that it was guarding something. A dungeon, most likely, that could be nearby. Vicar's heart quickened at the thought of the treasure that might be hidden within. He knew that dungeons were often the lairs of powerful monsters. Vicar was determined to explore the dungeon, but before going there he took a handful of Cerberus feces and applied it to his body. Vicar knew that by doing this, he could avoid any small monsters that might be lurking in his path. Vicar's keen senses were on full display as he tracked the steps of the Cerberus through the forest. He noted the dried soil, the rotten leaves, and the moist roots, following the trail with a single-minded focus. As he backtracked the path, his eyes widened in recognition. This was the dungeon that the Cerberus had been guarding, and Vicar realized that he had been here before. He knew that this dungeon would be discovered in another 10 years, but he was certain that it would be completely empty by then. Right now, however, he could feel the mana beneath the rotten surface. Vicar cautiously approached the dungeon. He looked around, but he didn't see any light, and he realized that the dungeon must be deeper than he initially thought. But Vicar was undaunted. His crimson eyes glowed with excitement as he stepped inside the dungeon. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of treasures were waiting for him inside. As Vicar made his way through the dark dungeon, he saw ruby minerals that were scattered throughout the area. He was certain that these veins must be connected to the nearby Red All Mountain. Suddenly, he saw a glimmer of light shining from within the dungeon, and he couldn't help but wonder if it was the entrance he had been searching for. Eager to explore further, he quickened his pace and soon found himself standing in a brightly lit room. As his eyes adjusted to the light, he was struck by the sight of a massive ruby placed on a pillar in the center of the room. He couldn't help but marvel at the beauty of the gem, and he realized that it must be infused with mana to produce such a bright glow. However, his moment of awe was interrupted when he spotted a nearby skeleton lying on the ground. As he approached, he noticed signs of violence, including deep stab wounds and dried brown bloodstains. He realized that someone had been here before him, and it had been quite some time since their untimely demise. Curious, Vicar picked up a letter that was lying next to the skeletal remains. The writer of letter began by introducing himself as Cain and explaining that he didn't want to dirty the pure white paper with his name. As Vicar read on, he realized that the handwriting was that of a Baskerville, and he wondered if the writer was a member of that Baskerville family. The letter went on to describe how Cain and his brother Abel had stumbled upon the legendary stone chamber that had been talked about within the family for generations. The two brothers had managed to navigate countless trials and kill many monsters in their quest to reach the chamber. However, the final assignment they found within had tied them there for 3 long years. Vicar couldn't believe the sacrifice they made for the treasure within the dungeon. He wondered what kind of treasure could possibly be worth such a sacrifice. His attention was drawn back to the present as he gazed upon the magnificent ruby at the center of the chamber, realizing that it must be the key to unlocking the final assignment of the dungeon. Vicar read the puzzle on the monument out loud. When entering, it's 1, but once inside, it's 2. When leaving, it's 1. He couldn't make sense of it, but he remembered reading in the letter that Cain and Abel had also struggled with it. According to the letter, the two brothers had contemplated over the ominous text for a long time before coming to a conclusion. Cain had written that he and Abel were twins who were separated at birth. In order to obtain the treasure of the dungeon, they needed to become one again. That meant only one of them could leave with the treasure. Cain had ended up killing his own brother in a fierce battle, but despite that, there was no change. They had definitely gone from 2 to 1, but Cain couldn't take the treasure. After moments of regret, Cain had decided to leave the place and warn others not to come. He had written in the letter that there was nothing to obtain from this devil's den that only serves to taunt humans. Vicar read the letter carefully as Cain recounted their journey to the dungeon. They had faced countless challenges to get there, but now they were left with nothing. Vicar couldn't help but think about the assignment he had been given, and the fact that it was the same as Cain and Abel's despite the fact that he didn't have a twin. He knew that Cain and Abel had misinterpreted the text, but what did it mean? When entering, it's 1, but once inside, it's 2. When leaving, it's 1. The words echoed in his mind as he tried to decipher their meaning. Vicar refused to give up. He knew that there was no dungeon that could not be beaten, and he was determined to solve this puzzle. Vicar examined the skeleton carefully and suddenly had a realization. He thought about Cain and Abel's failure and understood that their downfall was their fixed mindset as two individuals. As he walked towards the ruby in the middle of the room, he analyzed the dark passageway leading to a bright stone chamber and realized that the answer to the dungeon was in the riddle. I am one when entering through the dark passageway, but as soon as the ruby's light casts a shadow on me, I become 2. And when darkness re-enters, is when the stone chamber's final stage will open. As he broke the ruby, Vicar revealed that the answer was shadow. As Vicar broke the ruby, a sudden flash of light illuminated the room, revealing the treasure that had been hidden in the dungeon. Vicar's eyes widened in amazement as he realized what lay before him was the cause of the two brothers' deaths. Standing in front of him was a sword that emitted an evil aura, placed upon a stone. Vicar was shocked at the sight of the sword and wondered if it was the relic of the devil's den. As he examined the sword, his eyes fell upon the text inscribed on the stone beneath it. It stated that only those with Baskerville's blood would be able to take Beelzebub. He was surprised and shocked to learn that the sword Beelzebub originated from this very place. At the mention of sword Beelzebub, his mind raced with memories of a childhood long gone. He recalled a picture book he had seen as a child, which depicted the gluttonous fly Beelzebub, an unprecedented great monster that had invaded the continent in old legends. He remembered that Beelzebub was part of the devil's holy constellation, also known as the 7 Calamities, and that the heads of the 7 families had stepped up to stop them. Vicar recalled that the first Baskerville patriarch had fought Beelzebub, and the remnants of its power had been stored in the lands of Baskerville. The demonic energy of Beelzebub was said to have lured monsters, and although the legend was dismissed by most as a mere myth, Vicar knew that it was true. The sword in front of him was proof of that. Vicar also recalled that the blade in front of him had been taken by the demon clans, resulting in countless deaths among humans on the battlefield. As Vicar tried to pull the sword out, he He declared that it would never fall into the demon clan's hands again because it was his now. Suddenly, he felt an energy entering his hand and he exclaimed in surprise. He held the hilt firmly in his hand, and suddenly, the sword disappeared from sight. A moment later, it reappeared, fully fused with Vikar's hand. As Vikar extended his hand, the sword Beelzebub emerged from it, emitting a faint aura. Vikar gazed at the blade with wonder, knowing it was made from the corpse of a devil's holy constellation. He felt lucky to have received such a powerful weapon. With a grin on his face, Vikar wondered how much stronger he would become in this life with Beelzebub at his side, and the anticipation filled him with excitement. After exploring the dungeon and realizing that there was nothing else for him to obtain, Vikar made the decision to head back. However, as he was leaving, he suddenly felt something strange happening to his body. He fell on his knees, feeling dizzy and hungry. As Vikar looked down at his hand, he heard Beelzebub's voice echoing, and Vikar realized that it was not he who was hungry, but the sword itself. As Vikar walked out of the dungeon, he clutched his stomach with a painful expression. The hunger that had gripped Beelzebub had taken a toll on him, and he wondered if his sense of smell had been heightened as a result. Suddenly, Beelzebub began to pull Vikar towards a certain direction, tugging at his hand as if urging him to follow. Vikar ran in the direction that the sword was leading him, curious about what he would find. As he reached the location, he saw that it was the corpse of the hellhound that he had killed earlier. Vikar was surprised to see that Beelzebub was drawn to the corpse, and he extended the sword towards it. Vikar watched as Beelzebub absorbed the blood of the hellhound, feeling his own hunger subside as the sword's voracious appetite was sated. He couldn't help but wonder if Beelzebub's hunger had caused the trees and soil in the nearby mountain to dry up. As he looked down at Beelzebub, Vikar felt a sense of responsibility towards the sword and thought to himself, feeling a sense of frustration at Beelzebub's unpredictable nature. Beelzebub finished its meal, making a satisfied sound. Vikar watched as the sword's hunger was finally sated, and he took the opportunity to study its abilities. He looked at the slots on the sword and saw that Beelzebub's inherent ability was called Glutton of Flies. Vikar knew that this power allowed the sword to absorb the skills of its opponents, making it a formidable weapon in battle. However, the absorption amount was nearly infinite, which meant that countless people had lost their abilities and become obsolete after facing Beelzebub. Vikar was aware of the hazardous nature of this power, and he knew that he could only steal up to 3 abilities for the sword. As he examined the first slot on Beelzebub, Vikar saw that it was now equipped with the Hemorrhage Hellhound skill, which was rated B+. This skill allowed the sword to constantly pump out the blood of its opponent, even through the smallest of wounds. Vikar suddenly got an idea and went to the dead Cerberus's body, with Beelzebub starting its work. However, Vikar tried to stop it, saying that it couldn't devour all of it, as he wouldn't be able to explain it during the autopsy if it was too damaged. Vikar lightly tapped Beelzebub on his hand and said, "Enough." Beelzebub cried out in pain like a little child. Afterward, Beelzebub now had all 3 slots full: Burn Injury Cerberus A+ rank, Hemorrhage Hellhound B+ rank, and High-Speed Regeneration Norvegicus Sewer Rat F rank. Vikar was surprised to see the high-speed regeneration ability, and noticed the dead rat under the Cerberus. He realized that Beelzebub had consumed the sewer rat that was crushed underneath the Cerberus. Vikar thought it was a great achievement to have acquired the burn injury skill from the Cerberus, as thermalgia is one of the worst pains a human could experience. It would be much worse than the Hellhound's hemorrhage. Now that they were done preparing the monster to submit for the practical exam, Vikar suggested waiting there until it was over. The young hounds had completed their practical examinations and returned to Baskerville, where they eagerly awaited their evaluations. As the evaluations were done, the young hounds received a shield, sword, or necklace as their reward produced from the parts of the monsters the hounds had hunted during their exams. But one young hound who had hunted one particular monster had left a lasting impression on the Baskervilles who were present. Hugo, the patriarch of the Baskerville family, sat in his office, looking surprised as he asked his head butler a question. "Who caught what?" The head butler responded, informing him that Master Vikar van Baskerville, an 8-year-old hound, had hunted the Cerberus and a ranking monster who had accidentally crossed over to the restricted area during the practical exam. Hugo was surprised that Vikar hunted a high-ranking monster that even the family's guardian knights tended to avoid. The head butler went on to explain that the monster had been wounded by the barbarian tribe and that Master Vikar had applied poison to his wooden spear. But there was no further information on what kind of poison it was or how he obtained it. Hugo was intrigued, but the head butler could only report what was written in the hunting journal. He had planned to ask Master Vikar about it, but the young hound had returned to his dorm, stating that he was quite tired. Hugo was amused, remarking that the little brat was already so sly. He believed that information was power, and power was worth something. The head butler couldn't help but express his shock, saying that he was surprised that a hound named Van, rather than Lorelei, was so talented. Hugo responded, saying that he did not discriminate based on a hound's bloodline. He raised hounds based on their talent and spite, not their lineage. This meant that even mutts could come from royal bloodlines. The head butler was left wondering if Hugo was concerned about his second son, who was preparing for isolation training. However, he didn't voice his thoughts aloud and simply apologized. Hugo dismissed his apology, but said that he needed a mood booster, and head butler responded by saying that he will summon Master Vicar. Vicar stood in front of Patriarch Hugo, looking composed and confident. Hugo asked him about his success in catching the Cerberus during his practical exam, and Vicar calmly replied that he had used chocolate on his wooden spear, as it was a lethal poison for canid monsters. This surprised Hugo, who then realized the reason why Vicar had asked for chocolate before the hunt. The head butler, who was present in the room, was taken aback by the lack of a proper greeting between the two, wondering if this was really a conversation between a father and son. But the conversation continued, with Hugo asking Vicar why he had not responded properly when the butler had questioned him about the hunt. Vicar explained that the butler was not his master, and when Hugo asked who his master was, Vicar simply said that as he belonged to the clan, the master of the clan was his master as well. Hugo smirked as he congratulated Vicar on his successful hunt, telling him that as a reward, the monster's corpse would be his alone to claim, and as the highest scorer, he had the privilege of making a wish. Vicar's eyes lit up at the opportunity, and he knew exactly what he wanted. With a determined expression, he spoke his wish aloud, requesting access to the 10,000 Epistle Library. 10,000 Epistle Library was one of the largest libraries in the Empire, located deep within the heart of the Baskerville clan. Hugo raised an eyebrow in surprise at the request, reminding Vicar that only the Patriarch and second in command, along with their direct descendants, were permitted to enter the library. Undeterred, Vicar stated that he was willing to give up if it wasn't allowed, but secretly he was already planning to sneak in. To his surprise, however, Hugo granted him permission to enter the library. Vicar was shocked, but it didn't end there. Hugo instructed him to read the Baskerville 6th technique, which was located within the 6th restricted zone deep inside the library. Vicar was taken aback as he heard that Hugo was allowing a child with the Van middle name to read the Baskerville 6th technique. It was unheard of for an illegitimate child to be allowed to go beyond the 4th technique. However, Vicar tried to stay calm and rationalize the situation. After all, it was only the 6th technique. But despite this, Vicar remained determined. He knew that Hugo was currently at the Baskerville 7th technique, and before his regression Hugo was able to bear 9 fangs. But he hadn't forgotten about the discrimination he had faced as an illegitimate child, and he was determined to rise above Hugo's level. His goal was to obtain the greatest essence of Baskerville, the textbook of swordsmanship containing the teachings of the first patriarch who was able to subjugate the 7 great disasters. He knew that this book would be the key to his success, and Hugo will be the one to hand it over to him. As Hugo smiled faintly and wished Vicar good luck, Vicar bowed and thanked him. He knew that Hugo had no idea of the true value of the random book he was handing over, but that didn't matter to Vicar. He was confident that he would make the most of this opportunity and grow stronger beyond everyone's expectations. Vicar arrived at the 10,000 Epistle Library for the first time and gazed around in amazement. As he browsed through the books, he read out their names to himself: severing incisors, grinding molars, piercing canines, snaggletooth that embeds twice, wisdom teeth that lay down, and other books on swordsmanship. These were the books on swordsmanship that he had desperately wanted to learn in his past life. However, Vicar knew that no matter how much mana an illegitimate child of Baskerville had, they could not learn any swordsmanship that was superior to the 4th technique. The Baskerville family had implemented this as a defense mechanism to ensure that the children who became hounds did not bare their teeth towards their master. Vicar eventually arrived at a place where a book was locked with chains with a lock in the middle. He wondered if this was it, the book on the 6th technique. He couldn't believe that Hugo had offered him the book on the 6th technique. Vicar knew that if it was before he regressed, he never would have dreamt of this opportunity. As Vicar unlocked the lock, he thought to himself that of course Hugo had allowed this, thinking that an 8-year-old child wouldn't be able to memorize the contents of the book in a day. But before Vicar's regression, he had already learnt the theory behind the 1st to 4th technique until he got sick of it. He had done this in order to deduce and speculate the theory of the 5th technique. Vicar had a realization that after drawing the 4th tooth, he needed to have stopped the flow of mana. Perhaps that was why he couldn't make the 5th tooth. The Baskerville swordsmanship had a unique trait where, depending on the stage of the sword, it's 1 tooth for the 1st technique, 2 teeth for the 2nd, and so on. And when you draw teeth, a special trait, a red sword energy, appears. Despite getting a chance to read the book on the 6th technique, Vicar didn't care about it. He had come to the 10,000 Epistle Library for a different reason: to find a stage that was higher than the one he was currently at. Victor walked out of the swordsmanship books section of the library, catching the guards by surprise. They questioned him in disbelief that was he done reading books already. The guards offered to get him more books, mentioning that there were other swordsmanship books deep within the library. But Victor declined and assured them that he had finished what he came for. The guards were amazed that Victor was done so quickly and suggested that he stay longer to browse other books. Victor assured them and said that he was thinking of reading other books before leaving. As Victor walked away, the guards began whispering amongst themselves, commenting that the section Victor was going to was filled with miscellaneous books. One of the guards suggested that if it were him, he would read about the textbooks on swordsmanship that were deep within the library. He wondered if Victor didn't know their worth because he was young. Victor overheard their conversation and thought to himself that he would leave them to their thoughts. He knew that among the dusty miscellaneous books lay a hidden treasure. As Victor looked around the library, suddenly his eyes lit up as he spotted a book titled A Lurking Ambush. He reached for it and held it in his hands, knowing that it was the book he had been searching for. He examined it and noted that it was a useless miscellaneous book with ripped pages, but he knew its true worth. He remembered a time before his regression when he was affiliated with the Hound squad. They had found a single ripped page from a swordsmanship textbook, with Baskerville's handwriting on it. Hugo, who was obsessed with finding the book that matched the page, had scoured the entire library and finally found it in a lurking ambush. The book contained the Baskerville ancestors' writings, including the 10th technique that Hugo had gone crazy over. He had sent hounds to the 7 great families to obtain the remaining 6 pages, even declaring war on those who refused. After the sacrifice of many hounds, all the missing pages were given to Hugo. But in the end, the only reward he received was a simple word: good job. Because of this, Hugo had broken through the 7th technique and achieved the 9th technique, but it came at a terrible cost. Under him was a pile of wasted hound corpses and blood. Victor's eyes narrowed with anger as he recalled this memory and said that it was a stupid life. He knew he could not let it happen again. Victor remembered all the contents of those missing pages and realized that the only reason he couldn't progress beyond the 4th technique was that he had no access to the original book. He knew that those missing pages held the key to mastering the techniques. Without them, the book was nothing but a collection of random and useless techniques. After reading the book for a while, he said aloud that if other people read this book, it would seem like a miscellaneous book that didn't make any sense. But the moment you use the missing pages and fill in the blanks, the false and misleading information turns into an amazing masterpiece of a book. Victor had reached the highest level of graduator aura and the highest level of the 4th technique before he regressed. He knew he could do it again, but this time, he wouldn't make the same mistake. He made a vow to himself that before he turned 15, he would reclaim the power he had lost. Victor was deeply engrossed in reading the book, and time seemed to pass quickly. When he finally closed the book, he realized that the night had turned into day. He was amazed at how much he had achieved during this time and felt proud of himself for memorizing the entire book's contents. As Victor stood up, he took notice of his surroundings and realized that the Guardian Knights were nowhere to be seen. He knew that he could not draw 10 teeth with a young body, but he was confident that currently he had the potential to achieve the 5th technique that he couldn't reach in his previous life. Victor entered a focused and determined state, with the statue before him. He began to strike it with his Baskerville sword technique, unleashing his full power with each attack. First, he executed the 1st technique, then the 2nd technique, followed by the 3rd technique, and finally, the 4th technique. As he fought, memories of his past flooded his mind. He remembered how hard he had worked to obtain the highest level of graduator aura in his previous life, but he couldn't learn a suitable sword technique, and only met with hostility from the people of the direct bloodline because he was an illegitimate child, and that was also the reason why he could not go beyond the 5th technique. But this time, Victor was determined not to let his past hold him back. He attacked the statue with all his might, channeling his anger and frustration into his sword strikes. In the midst of his attacks, Victor's thoughts turned defiant. With a vivid image of Hugo's face on the statue in front of him, he unleashed his technique, cutting through the statue with precision. Victor breathed heavily and wondered if he was able to execute the 5th technique. He clenched his hands and smiled as he felt a hot sensation rise from his heart to his neck. He was overwhelmed with happiness to the point that he could cry. Suddenly, he realized that he needed a sword to test his newly learned technique. At that moment, at a record-breaking speed in Baskerville's history, a young hound's canine teeth started to grow that were bared towards its master. Victor beamed with pride, his body still trembling with excitement from his success in drawing the 5th tooth. He couldn't believe how far he had come, and how quickly he had managed to do it. He marveled at the strength of his mana, now able to support him at a level he had only achieved after years of hard work in his previous life. As he looked at the liquid aura flowing within him, a sign of his newfound status as a graduator, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. Graduators were on a completely different level from sword experts, and he was now one of them. It was a point that had taken him 30 years to reach in his previous life, and yet here he was, only 8 years old. The solid aura within him had transformed into a liquid state, with increased density that allowed him to use it more freely. Vicar felt confident about his new skills and abilities, and he knew that he could achieve much more. He was determined to master the lurking ambush sword technique and use it to its full potential. He realized that with this technique, he could smoothly transition between offense and defense, making it the perfect technique with no limitations. Vicar carefully placed the book near the window and took a moment to reflect on his progress. He knew that he had come a long way since his regression, and he was now stronger and more skilled than ever before. He felt that he could challenge a mid-class graduator if he put his mind to it, and he was confident that he could win using his new skills. However, Vicar also knew that he couldn't reveal too much of his strength to Hugo. He needed to give Hugo something to look forward to, so he had enough time to take everything he needed. Vicar took out a magnifying lens and placed it carefully near the book. The sun's rays converged onto the pages of the book through the lens, and a little fire started burning it. With an evil grin, Vicar commented that the destruction of the book would make it difficult for Hugo and the hounds to reach the 10th technique, although Vicar himself would have no such difficulty. Suddenly, the guards, who had been nowhere to be seen, arrived in the library. The smell of burning paper had caught their attention. They were startled to see Vicar there and demanded to know what had happened. Vicar's expression quickly changed to one of apology, and he explained that he had accidentally left the magnifying glass around, which had caused the fire. He offered to inform the butlers of the incident. The guards knew that they could be punished heavily for this, and after a brief pause, one of them spoke up that this was not something that he needed to apologize for. It was their fault for not looking after him properly, and they were just glad that this was an area with only useless books. Vicar asked if they were busy with the Moore clan regarding the ruby mines. He thought they wouldn't have time to deal with small problems like this, especially since they weren't even there to begin with. The guards agreed to keep it a secret, as long as Vicar was willing to do the same. As he started walking away, Vicar suggested they keep the incident between themselves, and he apologized for taking up their time. As Vicar walked away, the guards spoke to each other about how nice and considerate he was towards the workers. They believed he deserved to be respected. Little did they know, Vicar had a mischievous grin on his face as he left them behind. As Vicar stood in Hugo's office, Hugo asked him if he had learned something enlightening in the library. Vicar responded that he had learned of something warm and sharp, yet soft and viscous. This statement shocked both Hugo and the head butler, who realized that Vicar might have achieved the aura. Aura was a sign of officially entering the world of the sword. Even geniuses must train without rest until the age of 15 to reach the level of low-class sword expert. Hugo was excited, but then realized that Vicar was only 8 years old and denied the thought of Vicar reaching that level. He then asked Vicar if he could show his father what he had learned, to which Vicar responded affirmatively. In the Colosseum-like structure, Vicar stood with a sword in his hand as many young hounds watched with confused looks on their faces. Head butler asked Hugo how he planned on testing Vicar's skills, to which Hugo replied that he was going to release a monster for Vicar to deal with. Head butler was shocked at the idea of releasing a monster, and Hugo confirmed that he had prepared a hungry and feisty one. The gate in front of Vicar opened and a guard brought in the chained orc. The orc was a massive, green-skinned creature with bulging muscles and razor-sharp tusks protruding from its mouth. Its beady eyes darted around the Colosseum, sizing up its opponents. The young hounds in the audience looked on in shock and awe at the sight of the fearsome creature. Some whispered to each other in disbelief, questioning whether it was really necessary to send an orc to face an 8-year-old. They wondered if the Guardian Knights would have to intervene if things got out of hand. Despite the audience's doubts, Vicar remained calm and collected, ready to face the orc with his sword. Hugo gave permission and the guard opened the orc's chains. The orc let out a loud roar and charged towards Vicar. However, Vicar remained calm and waited for the right moment to strike. As the orc approached him, Vicar swung his sword with lightning speed, cutting off the orc's arm in a swift motion. The audience, as well as the orc, were shocked by Vicar's sudden display of strength. But Vicar didn't waste any time and quickly swung his sword again, cutting off the orc's leg cleanly. The orc fell to the ground, growling in pain. Vicar, on the other hand, remained composed and analyzed the situation. He realized that the orc must be surprised that it was bleeding for the first time and that its distinctive skill, high-speed regeneration, won't activate either. Vicar knew that C-class monsters won't be able to stop the hemorrhage caused by a B-class hellhound. The audience was in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. They couldn't believe that an 8-year-old could be that strong. Some wondered if it was even possible to do that without collecting mana. Vicar looked at Hugo, but the latter's face remained calm and collected, and no expression could be seen on his face. Vicar knew that Hugo was still trying to determine what he had learned inside the library, and decided to show him what he wanted to see. Suddenly, Hugo's eyes began to glow, and the head butler exclaimed in shock, questioning if that was Aura Blade. Victor's sword began to glow with a bright red light as he charged towards the orc, who was attempting to stand up. With a swift strike, the aura blade sliced through the air and blasted off the orc's head. Hugo, who was seated on a nearby chair, couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. The head butler immediately recognized the glow emanating from Victor's sword as the aura of a low-class sword expert. He congratulated Hugo, exclaiming that they had just witnessed the birth of a genius, and that there would never be another like him in all the families of the Empire. However, Hugo's attention was drawn to the orc's blood, which continued to flow despite its reputation for rapid regeneration. He told the head butler that Victor had only won because the orc was weak. But just then, Victor's voice reached Hugo's ears, and he turned to face his son. With an innocent smile on his face, Victor asked, "Is there anything stronger than this orc?" The audience, filled with young hounds, was surprised when Victor requested a new and stronger opponent. Victor had his own motivations for wanting to face a stronger opponent. He hoped to impress his father, Hugo, and demonstrate his progress in front of the audience. He believed that by doing so, he could be acknowledged and possibly separated from his father, like being dispatched to a remote area or admitted to an academy. Hugo, who was watching from the sidelines, commented that the orcs he had brought in from afar were not enough to satisfy his son's hunger. He agreed with Victor and suggested that he should be facing more challenging opponents at his age. He turned to his head butler and asked him if there was a creature they had captured during a barbarian raid for experimentation. The head butler confirmed that there was just one creature left, and Hugo ordered for it to be brought in. Victor and the audience were surprised as they watched a troll being led into the arena. Victor stood in the arena, facing a fearsome troll that was twice his size. Victor asked for Hugo approval to start the fight. And as Hugo gave his approval, the troll's chains were released, and it lunged at Victor with a powerful punch. But Victor was quick and agile, and he managed to dodge the attack with ease. He swiftly moved behind the troll, taking advantage of its momentary confusion. In the audience, someone exclaimed that this was the perfect moment to attack and questioned why did Victor miss it. Hugo on the other hand nodded and explained that trolls had excellent regenerative power, so only fatal attacks were worth it. And that's why a plan was needed in order to hunt a troll. As the troll charged towards Victor, he gracefully dodged each of its attacks with ease. The audience watched in amazement as they saw Victor evading the troll's attacks effortlessly. However, they couldn't help but wonder why Victor wasn't fighting back. They speculated that maybe he was trying to tire the troll out or that he was a genius who had a plan up his sleeve. After a while, Victor realized that the fight was becoming tedious and decided to take action. He knew that if he used his full strength, he could easily kill the troll, but that would put him in a tough spot. He needed to make it seem plausible, and so he decided to use the troll's power against it. As the troll attacked again, Victor seized the opportunity and swiftly attacked its arm, almost detaching it from the troll's shoulder. The audience gasped in amazement as they saw Victor's quick and decisive move. They thought he had slayed the troll, but they soon realized that it would recover in an instant unless the wound was fatal. The troll's wounds began to heal at an alarming rate. Victor realized that the only way to kill it was with Beelzebub's hemorrhage skill. However, he also knew that using such a technique would be meaningless. Hugo advised Victor to stop before things got out of hand, but Victor ignored the advice and replied that he was almost done. He continued and told that he was near an epiphany, and if he could not kill Troll with his next attack he will give up. As the troll growled menacingly at Victor, he couldn't help but ponder over how much of his true power he should reveal. He knew that he had already decided on an answer. He wanted to show a scenario where he had leveled up from an epiphany during the fight. However, he was also curious to see how Hugo would react to this. His sword glowed red as he prepared for a powerful attack. As his sword struck the troll's head, it was cleanly sliced off without any resistance. Everyone, including the head butler and the audience, was shocked by what they had just witnessed. It was unprecedented for an 8-year-old to achieve the second technique of the Baskerville clan, which was normally attained at 18 years of age. Victor was overjoyed by his victory and had an innocent smile on his face as he declared that he had done it. However, Hugo was left in shock and couldn't believe what he had just seen. A week had passed since Victor's impressive display of power against the troll, and he found himself sitting in the Baskerville clan's dining area, staring down at a bowl of unappetizing miscellaneous meat porridge. While eating his food, Victor noticed that everyone was avoiding him, which didn't come as a surprise to him since power was everything in their family. But he was pleased when he saw that even Hugo was taken aback by his recent display of power. Victor reflected on what he had revealed about himself so far, including his Baskerville second technique and mid-rank sword expertise. However, he also knew the truth that he was in fact a low-rank graduator who could weakly perform the Baskerville fifth technique. With the skill he obtained from the troll, he believed he was now stronger than the average graduator. He then remembered that he had been eating a lot more since obtaining the skill for Beelzebub's third slot, which now had a super speed regeneration troll with a C+ rating. Suddenly, the triplets appeared behind Vikir, causing him to be surprised and cautious. He thought to himself that he didn't want to deal with them again, so he turned back to his food and resumed eating. The triplets quickly explained that they just wanted to tell him that he was so cool when he defeated Cerberus and the troll. Vikir was so surprised that he spat out his porridge. The triplets asked him if he was okay, but Vikir was suspicious of their motives. He thought to himself that it might be some kind of two-faced technique or deceitful policy. He considered beating them up before thinking about it more, but before he could act, the head butler, Barrymore, appeared behind him and called out his name. Vikir was surprised to see him and wondered why he was here. Barrymore then informed him that he should hurry to the Patriarch room, and Vikir wondered why Hugo had summoned him. In Baskerville Clan's Patriarch office, Patriarch Hugo sat on his chair as someone entered and greeted him. It was Morgue Clan Patriarch by proxy Adolf Morgue. Hugo acknowledged that it had been a while, and Adolf noted that he hoped the annual event would go smoothly. Hugo assured him that the joint training had always gone without a hitch. Adolf brought up the incident from last year when 2 children were seriously injured, one from each family. Hugo tried to downplay it, saying it was but a scratch and that Morgue's children seemed to be quite dramatic. Adolf retorted that it was because the Morgues were noble and dignified. The Baskervilles and the Morgues were once on good terms as they were a renowned mage clan and iron-blooded sword clan respectively. The past emperor had once said that magic and swords are a complementary pair, and because of this they began joint training sessions for children between the ages of 8 and 15, which was carried out annually in a good atmosphere. However, a problem arose when a ruby mine was discovered between their territories, and blood was spilt over the conflict. As a result, the 2 patriarchs came to be on bad terms, but they had to continue with the joint training as per the Emperor's command. Adolf had come in his brother's stead to ensure that the event went smoothly. Adolf mentioned to Hugo that he had heard news about a supernova appearing in the Baskerville family, which was a great blessing to the Empire. He explained that a rare genius, who was perhaps only born once a century, had been born to the Baskervilles. However, Hugo responded with pride, saying that it was not that big of a deal. Adolf noticed Hugo's reaction and was surprised that Hugo actually received the compliment. But then, Adolf mentioned that the Morgues also had a genius in their hands and called for his sister's daughter, Camus, to come into the room. Camus, a girl with red hair, entered the room and Adolf introduced her to Hugo as Rispani's daughter. Adolf turned to Camus and asked her if she was going to greet the Patriarch. But instead of answering the question, Camus accused Hugo for being the thief who stole their ruby mine and demanded that he give it back. This accusation didn't sit well with Hugo, who gave Adolf an angry stare and questioned the accusation. Camus then explained that Adolf had referred to the annoying chin beard as the thief who stole the ruby mine. Adolf denied ever saying such a thing, but Camus insisted that he had said it an hour and 42 minutes ago, right before getting off the carriage. Hugo, still trying to control his anger, asked for clarification, but Adolf tried to defuse the situation by suggesting that there was a misunderstanding. However, Hugo said that there was no need for Adolf to explain the Morgue clan's problems with children's education to him. Camus persisted in her demand for her rubies to be returned, complaining that she couldn't even do research without them. Adolf tried to calm her down by calling out her name, but to no avail. Hugo was losing his patience and commented in anger that it seemed like the Morgues didn't teach manners at all. Adolf defended Camus, questioning what Hugo planned on doing to a child and if he was threatening an 8-year-old girl. This left Hugo speechless as he couldn't bring himself to act in such a way that would hurt his pride. Suddenly, a new voice entered the room, remarking that the Morgues don't teach their children not to envy what belongs to others. The speaker of this voice was none other than Vikir, and the head butler informed Hugo that he had brought the young master. Adolf was taken aback by the sudden appearance of Vikir and couldn't help but wonder if he was the Baskerville supernova. However, his thoughts were interrupted when he realized that Camus, who was sitting right next to him, had disappeared. Camus, on the other hand, had approached Vikir and demanded to know what he had just said. Adolf called out her name, trying to stop her from causing a scene. Meanwhile, Vikir was analyzing Camus, wondering if she was the Morgue clan's iron-blooded empress, Camus Morgue. Vikir recalled Camus' reputation as the genius of geniuses within the Morgue clan, who had raised countless great mages. At her peak, she had killed all the monsters and barbarians in the Le Rouge et Le Noir mountain by herself, burning them to death on spears and creating the famous border of blood and ashes. In addition, her beauty was captivating, and she was able to manipulate even the imperial family. As a result, she was called the Fire Goddess of Authority. Vikir noted that this was all in the far future and that she was just a child right now. Camus interrupted Vikir's thoughts and aggressively questioned why the ruby mine belonged to Vikir. Vikir remained calm and collected, even going as far as to call Camus out on throwing a tantrum. Camus then began to cast a spell, but instead of attacking, she created an ice sculpture to illustrate her point. Vicar was surprised by Camus's use of spell as an ice sculpture instead of an attack, as was expecting a fight to break out between the two. As Camus pointed to her creation and began to explain, Camus pointed to a nearby cave and began to explain the situation regarding the ruby mine. She stated that the mine was situated on the border between Morgue and Baskerville territories and was called the Joint Security Area. Camus continued, saying that while the entrance to the mine was on Morgue territory, the mine itself ran underneath Baskerville territory, preventing the Baskervilles from claiming it all for themselves. Camus emphasized that the ruby mineral vein belonged to the Morgue clan, but the Baskervilles were claiming that it was trespassing and interrupting their mining activities. Camus further explained that the Morgues had offered to pay rent for the territory, but the Baskervilles had rejected the offer. Adolph seemed pleased with this explanation, but Hugo was becoming annoyed with the situation. Vicar then mentioned that rubies were commonly used for magic ingredients and that the Baskervilles didn't need to mine them. However, he also pointed out that it was unfortunate that the Baskervilles weren't fools who would open their territories just for few pennies. Camus was surprised and confused by this statement, pointing out that if the Baskervilles didn't need rubies, then why not rent their land? Vicar explained that the Baskervilles were only interested in their land and didn't want anyone else to profit from it. He warned Camus not to come into their territory, as they were the only ones who would lose out in the situation.